1, surely allow
You're
it.
not a rule breaker, are you?
Probably not. What yellow line? Right now we don't have one.
Don't you see it right there?
Oh, that yellow line.
Oh, there's the steam train. Choo-choo.
Go ahead.
Venom. Venom. Oh, Venom. Not ready.
All right, keep piling in. If you see a spot, fill a spot in. So keep moving in so everybody fits. Don't want anybody out in the rain.
Yeah, let's
There you go. So these shops here were in operation from about 1865 to about the turn of the century. I'd say right around 1908. They would bring in their locomotives here. They had large belts that ran up along the ceilings here. They were hooked up to a steam engine. That steam engine would rotate a large bar, and there would be leather belts going from that rotating bar coming down to the machines that were originally in here. When they needed to turn on a machine, they would engage the belt. The belt would latch on to the moving axle and start the machine moving. So we relied on steam for a lot these days. There would have been a stationary power plant that we could feed and make that steam. So there would have been various machines in here for cutting, rolling, making into new objects. Behind you here, there are lots of different pieces of scrap metal, different panels and rods. Our shop guys can, if they need a part, they can make it themselves in here. We don't have to go to the store to buy anything. And that was very true for the railroads. These locomotives were hand-built once upon a time. You couldn't just go to Walmart and buy a new piece for your locomotive. You had to make everything in shop, so you had machines all throughout here to machine those parts. Now when we got here in 1986, this railroad had been run by Consolidation Rail Corp., often known as Conrail. I imagine a lot of the scout leaders here might remember those blue and white locomotives from a while back. They were starting to go out when I was young. So when they were here, they had their own machine shop in here with all their machines, more or less electric, of course, being in the 1980s. However, when they left, they took everything with them. It's a business, so you don't want to leave anything behind. If you leave materials behind, you're leaving money behind. So they cleared out this entire shop. So when we got here, this was empty, and we had to figure out what to do with it. Beautiful thing is, because this shop has been modified so much between 1865 and the 1990s, this was no longer considered a historic structure by National Park Service, which meant we could modify it however we wanted, which was perfect. So we decided, well, we're going to need machines to work on our locomotives. So who best to go to than the U.S. military? As the U.S. military often has lots of surplus. They like to keep different machines around just in case they need them. So we said, hey Army, hey Navy, hey Air Force, we need machines that do X, Y, Z with ABC specs. Can you get them for us? And they said, oh, absolutely, of course we have them. So we have machines from all over. We have machines from military bases, aircraft carriers. The machine here behind you, I can't remember the name of the base right off my head, but it comes from Alabama, and essentially it helped make some of the pieces for spacecraft at one time. So that's a cool little thing about that cutting machine. But one thing you will notice when you go through our shops today is you will not see one single computer. There is only one computer in the shop. It's our 3D printer. Everything else we do by pencil, paper, and mathematical ingenuity. So pay attention to math class. If you want to be a mechanic, you might be using it. Otherwise, we have dedicated volunteers who help us out. When we first started, we have a lot of employees and volunteers who worked for the steam railroads. They knew how to operate all of these machines, and they knew how they all worked and what to do with them. Unfortunately, a lot of those gentlemen have since passed away, but before they left us, they taught the next generation how to operate these machines. That generation is teaching the next generation how to operate them. And one day, that generation is going to teach your generation how to operate these machines as well. So here at Steamtown National Historic Site, not only do we preserve history, not only do we preserve cool objects, but we also preserve the technological know-how of how to keep a railroad on the move. Are there any questions? I could take 3. Go ahead. We use a 3D printer sometimes for making parts. Sometimes, like the numbers on our locomotives, we'll use a 3D printer to make those so we have something that looks good on the locomotive. As far as what else we use it for, that's actually a good question. I'll have to ask one of the mechanics sometimes, because I actually never asked the question myself. So, good question. Go.
How old did you have it?
I do not know. I do not remember how long we had the 3D printer. I can take 2 more questions, non-3D printer related. All right, everybody good?
I have a question.
Yes.
What qualifications would you have to have for you to get a job that you're working on the steam locomotives?
Yes. Good question. So the question was, what qualifications do you need to work in this shop? So here at Steamtown National Historic Site, we start taking volunteers with rail ops and in our shop starting at age 18. Once you turn 18, you can volunteer. We like you to have a little bit of knowledge of how to operate the machines, a little bit of mathematics, a little bit of science, but we will teach you. So as long as you're 18 and want to volunteer, we'll teach you how to work these machines. A lot of our volunteers, however, come in from the U.S. military. So we have a lot of diesel mechanics who help us out. They came in from their jobs in the Marines, in the Navy, in the Army, and they knew how to work on our diesel locomotives, so they start out working on those diesels, and then we slowly teach them how to work these different machines and how to work on steam. So if you're ever interested, come back to us when you're 18. We might be able to get you in the shops. All right, we're going to start moving on a little bit here. I'll point out that, what do I want to point out? Here we go. So I did tell you before we move on a little lie. My little fib was that all the machines were gone in this building when we got here, and that's not true. So there was 1 or 2 machines left, and it sits right up there. So that crane was built in around 1910 and has been here ever since. Conrail, when they moved out, well, a little harder to take a crane down, so they left their cranes here, decided that they didn't need them. And naturally, we got here, we decided we had to figure out if it works, right? We're curious people. So we sent a gentleman up one of these poles. He climbed up along the pole and got into the seat on the right-hand side. We started it up and a nice arc of electricity went over his head. So we call the crane Sparky. OSHA calls it dead. So it's one of the last remaining pieces of this shop, but it's something really cool. One more, go ahead.
Did the guy survive?
He did, yes.
Yay.
Kevin Bose still works with us.
Wow, he didn't quit.
I'll go up the crane anymore, but he does work with us. So next we're going to be moving into the next part of our shop. Take a look around as we're going through and see and take note how this part of the shop is different from the next part that we're going to go into. So please follow me.
I see an Elko in there. Get on the yellow line, sir. Go for ice cream.
That honestly sounds pretty scary.
I see an Elko in there, and I am
I
excited.
would not want to be chilling up there. Robert, what do you have?
Just imagine you're sitting up there, and the first thing you hear is just
I
a
mean,
large
it's probably because I had it wired up. Hold on to my bottle for me so I can...
Elko.
Yeah.
FA unit.
Or either you walk in here, you go back and walk in. drop off with Granddad?
Get off me.
Which one is it? Which one is it?
Move the fuck out the way.
Never seen anything. Stop trying to walk off the line.
Forklift.
Someone has to go get your grandpa.
Bro, I walked off the line for like 2 seconds.
No, and you kept doing it.
Come in, fill right on in here. Yep. I'm going to start them there and we'll see if we have space. Yep, keep coming. Keep coming.
How y'all doing?
Pretty good.
Yep, keep moving in. Keep coming on in. Keep the line moving. Keep it coming. I'm coming.
Question, this flaming wheel is never supposed to happen.
You're going to come up to here for it.
I want to finally walk off the line.
The picture on the flaming wheel, is that supposed to happen?
We will actually talk about that shortly. So keep
I'm
filling
gonna tell you
in.
all about that right now.
Yep.
Hunter.
Keep filling in, please. Keep filling. All right, you can come this way. Yep, keep filling on in. All right, everybody. This is one of our dedicated employees, Johnny Bibelow. He does a lot for us. And we're very appreciative to have him here. So he's going to talk to you a little bit about how we maintain some of the wheels here at Steamtown National Historic Site.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the back shop here at Steamtown. I'm Johnny Bibelow. I'm a preservation specialist for the past 30 years here at Steamtown. Today, I'm going to show you how we change steel tires on antique steam locomotives. So this right here is a wheel set from an antique steam locomotive that was built in 1917. It's a relatively small wheel set. I'm going to light it up there.
Oh my.
It's a relatively small wheel set. This is called a trailing truck wheel. It rolls behind much larger drive wheels with the drive rods attached to it. But it's similar in design to those drive rods in the respect that the outer portion is a steel tire on a cast steel rim. And what happens when that locomotive rolls down the tracks? Those tires are going to wear. You have steel on steel. And the flange that runs inside the rail that keeps it on track, that'll wear thin after a while. Sometimes you get flat spots if it skids to a stop or slips climbing a grade. So the first thing we can do when we get those conditions is chuck the entire wheel set up on centers here in a big wheel lathe in the back shop. And turning it using cutters, we can reprofile the outer portion of that tire. But once we do it so many times, we have to change the tire. So to change a steel tire, we use a ring of fire to heat that steel up enough to expand that tire away from the rim. And two guys with sledgehammers, one on each side, will knock that tire off onto this bracket that we bolted through there. Then we can remove the old tire and hang a new tire up there. Now that new tire will bore out the center slightly smaller than that rim diameter. So we have to heat that new tire up first to expand it enough so we can push it out. And as it cools, it shrinks. And that's what holds that tire on there. But now this is a relatively cool flame. If we were going to heat that up, we want to get a nice blue flame, a nice hot blue flame. So I'd add a little air to it. And we'd run it like that if we're going to heat that up. The idea is to heat the tire up quickly before the heat soaks into the rim too, so only the tire expands. So that's how we change steel tires on steam locomotives here. Now that y'all had a period of instruction in changing tires on locomotives, you know we have a great volunteer program here. You can always come up and give us a hand. Or just come up and visit. But there is another thing we do too. I don't know if any of you have heard of this guy. His name is Johnny Cash. We sing a song by good old Johnny Cash called The Ring of Fire. I fell into a burning ring of fire. Went down, 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 and the flames went higher. Burns, burns, that ring of fire. So we have fun while we're doing it too. There you are. Got any questions?
I thought it was my social disclosure.
Yes, sir.
What's the fuel?
I'm using propane. Well, back in the old days, they had gas lighting in a lot of the buildings, and they used natural gas back in those days. Yes, sir.
So is this this like add steel?
Does it add steel?
Yeah.
Actually, no. What it's doing is it's heating the steel up so it'll expand, so we can knock that out. But we'll put new steel on there. Matter of fact, as you go through the shop here, you'll have the opportunity to see a large set of drive wheels that is actually 80-inch drivers that are on the other end over there. And they have brand new tires on them. There's a lot of material. These here, there's not too much left. It's about 1.5 inches maybe of steel left on this old tire. It's been turned down a couple of times. But yeah, those big drivers, they're congested.
Where did you get a big steel tire like that from? You guys actually
Well,
company or do you
yeah,
guys-
we buy them, yeah. And then we buy them and they have extra material on the inside. So we could bore them out. We have a big King vertical boring mill, and we could bore out the inside to the exact specification. There's actually a chart that, depending on the diameter of the wheel, depend on how many thousandths of an inch undersized you want to bore out that new tire. So a tire like this here size is roughly about 35 to 40 thousandths of an inch undersized on the bore. So you have to expand it that much and then some to push it on. Now a larger tire would be a little more. Well, I don't know. If you stay pretty much within the range that they have on the chart, I know a 72-inch drive wheel, we're looking at between 94 to 100,000 of an undersize. So you expand it on the outside. A 80-inch driver is going to be more. Probably about 125,000. So the larger the more you have to expand. Smaller the tire, the less. Another thing too, like this here just being a trailing truck, it rolls behind the drive wheel. So you don't have the brake, you have cast iron brake shoes that apply to the drive wheel. That creates heat, all that friction. So if your tires, you turn them down and they're starting to get kind of thin, friction from the heat is from the friction actually, could actually cause a tire to break. Yeah, break free.
So Johnny, are the tires the same size as the wheel set? They're small, right?
Right. Yeah, you have to hold it on. Oh, yes.
That's how you heat up to take it off. You have to heat up the new one to put it back on. How would you do that?
Right. You have to heat it up and then we remove the ring. Usually when we do it, I have this just rigged up for a demonstration. Normally we'd have this hanging from the overhead crank. So we could just pull that ring right out of the way once that's hot enough, and then we'd knock that tire out. And then we hang the new one up on the bracket, we put the ring back onto it and heat that new tire up. And of course, right, then we would be able to swing that ring right off of it again. Yes, sir.
How did you become interested in antique trains?
Excuse me?
How did you become interested in working on these trains?
That's a good question. Well, you know, like most young boys, I had a train to them every year, but I never had a big layout. We had a small. But the way I got started working here, I was actually, after I got out of the service, I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps out of high school. I worked construction afterward. I started a family of my own, and things were kind of tough. They had an opening down here for a parking, a temporary job. I applied for that. I got it, and I helped build a passenger depot outside. We poured concrete, built all that. Anyway, that was done. They had another job opening up here in the shop as what they call a preservation trainee. And it was a slight cut in pay, but it was a permanent job with the federal government here in Park. And they sent me to school down in Frederick, Maryland to learn all about the rules and regulations regarding historic structures. I went to a lot of like international trades workshops where you learn a lot of antique crafting, timber framing, and different types of wood joining techniques, masonry, all kind of blacksmithing. But after years of working here and going through some training programs, learning how to do condition assessments on historic structures and things like that, eventually I became a preservation specialist, and which is what I am for the last 25 years or so. But coming here, I was a carpenter, a mason, a plumber, and a basic electrician. Since being here, I'm a boiler maker, I'm an industrial painter, I'm a metal fabricator, I'm a welder, and I'm a more intricate woodworker. I've made a lot of mahogany windows now for some of our passenger coaches and things like that, and vestibule doors and such. But it's really a great job, a place to really grow and expand your horizon. So it's really, it's nice. It's something if you're interested in the trades, it's a nice job to do. We actually do have an apprenticeship program, TCAP program we call it. It's through our Historic Preservation Training Center in Frederick, Maryland. We currently have 2 employees that have been working this program, and they're pretty much at the end of their apprenticeship, and they'll be coming on as permanent employees. So that's something to look into if you're interested. Yeah.
What type of schooling and training are you required for this job?
Actually, I think if you just come here with the basic will to learn, you could start at an entry level, and they'll provide you with the training. You know, how to work. It's kind of like what happened to me.
Any more questions? One or two?
How heavy is that?
You know what?
How heavy is that?
How heavy is this?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I do take this on the road to do demonstration in other parks or other activities throughout the year, and kind of help show up a little bit about what we do at Steamtown and help to bring visitors in and educate the public. So, being I take it on the road, I have to load it on a trailer. So the whole setup, the wheel set plus the wheel stand, is about 5,500 pounds. But a set of main drivers for the locomotive this came off of was 12,500 pounds, the main drive. Now they're much larger, but they also have counterweights plus the pins that hold the drive rods. And there's a lot more to the casting on the rim itself, you know, for the drive rods. They're a lot bigger. But so this is, like I said, relatively small. But and everything, even if it's small, it's big. Yes, sir.
How much, like, does all this stuff cost?
How much does it cost?
Yeah, like, fix all this stuff.
Well, I don't know. That's one department I don't really have much knowledge of. I don't do our purchasing at all or anything like that. So, I know they pay me peanuts. No, I make a decent living and put my family through college. Any other questions? Well, I'm so glad y'all came out here to see what we're doing here at Steamtown, you know, putting on your nerve back. Yeah. Yes. Well, actually, when we heat that tire up, it's only looking probably about 350 degrees maybe. It's keeping it, it's not heating it up to a critical temperature that it changes the molecular structure of the steel. If you take it up to a critical temperature, then you're gonna start to actually weaken the steel, you know, and it's not gonna perform right. It's about 350 degrees, you know. That's a good question.
All right, everybody, can we give Johnny a round of applause, please?
Thank
before we move on to our next spot, I'm just going to use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit since the garage door is open. So if you look out the back of the garage here, past our diesel units here, you'll see a very, very tall building with many, many windows. Looks like it could be multiple floors high, possibly multiple rooms. Believe it or not, that is one room built by the Lackawanna Railroad in approximately 1908. So that is the erecting hall. Essentially, that building would replace this building. So while this building would be part of the main locomotive shop right up until the turn of the century, exactly how I was talking earlier, how the roundhouse would eventually have to be expanded to accommodate those larger locomotives, so too did our workshop. This became too small to work on the steam engine, and the cranes that were in here were not strong enough as well. So they would build that hall over there. It had 40 different tracks inside the building for them to work on locomotives. It had a crane that could lift a locomotive off its wheels, set it to the side, and so they could work on wheel sets like this. It had a forge, it had a foundry, it had a pattern shop where they could make patterns for pouring that molten metal into different shapes. Anything needed to keep a steam railroad on the move was in that building. If they wanted to, they could build a whole locomotive from that shop. To at least the records I've seen, they never did, but they at least had all the equipment they needed to make a new locomotive. So that there today is now owned by the Department of Defense, operated by General Dynamics, and they make artillery shells over there. So I would love to take you on a tour over there, but if we went on a tour, you would all have to find your way back to your campsite, and somebody would have to tell one of the Rangers I need there. So we're not going to go over there today, but part of the reason why we have steamtown here was we have so much of the infrastructure that this railroad ran on, including the erecting halls. We have one of the original workshops, the roundhouse. We have office buildings that were here. We had maintenance of way buildings. We had an old mining building that we used to have. But going back to where I was trying to go to, tangents are fun. So that erecting hall there, that would operate right up until, do you remember when they closed the erecting hall?
I think it was somewhere around the 50s, I believe, when it became part of the Department of Defense.
Okay. So right up until the 1950s, which is about the end of steam railroading, they would use that erecting hall. So what kind of locomotives do we use today? Yes. Yes, we use diesel, specifically diesel electric locomotives. Now, believe it or not, diesel electric locomotives started to come around in about the 1930s. So that locomotive that you saw out in the yard by the caboose, number 426, that is a locomotive that is original to this yard and was purchased by Lackawanna Railroad for this yard. And it would be small diesels like that at first that would start phasing into the railroads, replacing locomotives like the Baldwin number 26 switching locomotive that we rode behind today. But what was happening in the 1940s? What was that? The Great Depression. That was the 1930s, but close.
World War II.
World War II. So in World War II, we had tanks, of course. We had military vehicles that we were making. And a lot of railroads got put, at least railroad builders, got put into service of making those war materials, whether they were tanks, trucks, jeeps, and so forth. A lot of those ran on diesel technology. So over the course of World War II, these railroad builders got really good at making diesel engines. So after the war, they had all this technology that they could use, and they started incorporating it into their locomotives. Compared to their pre-war predecessors, these locomotives were more powerful, more efficient, more effective. And most importantly for the railroads, they were more cost-effective and required less maintenance. The average steam locomotive is going to spend roughly 70% of its life in a shop, whether that is in the roundhouse, in a shop like this, or in the erecting halls. 70% of its life. This guy, 20% of its life. That's a lot less time it's going to be in a shop being worked on. And the more that a locomotive is in a shop being worked on, the less money that railroad's going to make off that locomotive. Imagine going to a car dealership and purchasing a brand new 2024 model automobile. But the promise that came with that automobile is every 100 miles, you're going to have to bring your car back to the car dealership to be maintenance. You want that car? Probably not. The
Depends on
railroad
the
didn't
gas
want that
mileage.
locomotive anymore. And that's why diesel technology was so, it started to become a big part of the railroads. Now when these diesels were coming in, because they need less maintenance, we didn't need that whole roundhouse complex anymore. There were 5 to 10 men per bay working in there. And let's just say you had 5 to 10 men in every single bay, which might have happened, but likely not. There's 46 bays. Who's good at math? Oh, come on, somebody's got to be good at math. Okay. So you have 10 people per bay, 46 bays. How many people are working in the roundhouse? Okay, so we'll ask the rest of the crowd. 46 bays, 10 workers per bay. 460 workers. So, of course, that's a lot of people you're paying, right? Well, when these guys came in, you didn't need all those workers. You didn't need all that space. So this part of the shop, and going that way a little bit more than we're going to go, was built by the General Electric Motive Division, correct? Or did I get that wrong? It was built by General Electric, and basically this room would replace that entire building. That's how much or how little maintenance these things needed. And that was a lot of jobs lost. At the height of this railroad in the 1920s, there were about 3,000 to 4,000 employees working in this yard alone, whether that was on a locomotive, in the shops, or elsewhere within the facility. As far as workers go within the shops themselves, they could cut their workforce by up to half. For a city built on railroads, and there were 5 railroads in the city, that was a lot of jobs lost. Coal mines were also going out because they didn't need their steam locomotives anymore. And so it was a hard hit for this area. A lot of people needed to find work and couldn't find work. And a lot of people had to move out of the city. But not everything is bad. It's actually because of these diesel shops that we are able to do what we do here at Steamtown National Historic Site. This diesel shop allows us to have space to put our equipment. It gives a nice dry space for our employees like Johnny to work, so he doesn't have to carve anything out in the rain. And I'm sure you appreciate not being stuck out on a rainy day like today. But in particular, we don't have a heavy crane that we can lift steam locomotives with anymore like was in that building. So what we have is what is called a drop tape. So on our next stop, we're going to go take a look at that drop tape that helps make what we do here possible. Sound good, everyone? Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to return to the yellow line. Please follow me.
Thank you for your service, sir.
Oh, thank you. And while you're down there, don't forget to look at those big drive wheels. They're huge. They're 80 inches.
Pressure makes sign. We missed it. And then we also where?
Nice. 3713's wheels. Drop pit. Well, I mean, if you drop down there, you're going to be probably killed pit.
A lot of the inspections and maintenance on these diesel locomotives have been going on right here. So like our GP9 514, they could do maintenance, and the motive power for these locomotives was actually in the wheels for the diesel. So you can see on your on row 5 over here, you have the diesel engine. Actually, that's on that. Actually, Norm, would you like to talk about how the diesels work? Everybody, this is Connie. She was from the Boston Maine Railroad, ran on their main line between Boston, Massachusetts and Portland, Maine. And this is one of our locomotives that we hope to get back up in the steam and put back on the main line. So when we get over there, you are more than welcome to step off the yellow line into the gated off area. Please follow me and we'll make our way over to Constitution. free to fill right on in. That's it. Keep filling. 13. We are doing a full restoration of this locomotive in hopes of one day getting it operating. So we only have that one operating steam locomotive at the moment, Baldwin number 26. We love Baldwin number 26, but since it is a switching locomotive, it can't go very far. It's only made to really operate in a rail yard. This, however, was a mainline locomotive. This was made to go long distances at high speeds. This particular locomotive could get up to 80 to 100 miles an hour. So, as I mentioned, this was for the Boston and Maine Railroad, and it's kind of unique in the fact that it has a name. Oftentimes in the United States, we did not give locomotives names. These were machines built for industry. You ran them until they died, and then you scrapped them and made a new locomotive. Right around the 1860s, we stopped naming them. This one, however, has a unique story. So we're going to go back to the 1930s. Great Depression is going on, and we needed a way to distract the American public, or at least this railroad felt the need to help distract the American public. So they would send out an essay contest to schools all throughout New England. As long as you lived along the Boston and Maine Railroad, you could submit a name. All they wanted for your essay was what you wanted to name the locomotive and why. Why should it be named such? If you won, your one locomotive would be named. They were going to name 10 locomotives. This was one of 5 of the passenger ones that they were going to name. And that's basically all. You just tell them what name you want and why it should be named as such. Once you, if you won, your name of the locomotive would go onto the engine along with your name and your school's name. So James Schumann Moore would send in an essay. His essay was this: the United States Constitution is the backbone of the United States, just as the railroads are the backbone of American industry. That's all he wrote. And with that short essay, he got a locomotive named. So we lovingly have Connie here, and he got his name on the Constitution. It would pull lots of passenger trains, especially with the coming of World War II, getting troops to the Boston Harbor to be deployed off to the European theater. So I would love to tell you that we're restoring it because it is the last of its kind, which it is. And I would love to tell you that it's being restored because of its name, the Constitution. But that isn't quite the case when it comes to the steam locomotives. Usually it comes down to dumb luck. So this is what is, before I get too deep into that, this is what we call a super Pacific locomotive. Pacific refers to its wheels, the number of wheels. So it had 4 wheels in the front underneath that guided it around corners. You can, if you're in the front, you can see its wheel set off here to your left. It would have had 6 drive wheels, like the ones that we were looking at earlier. That's its drive wheels. And then it would have had 2 wheels underneath the firebox. Why we call it a Super Pacific is because it was built with all the bells and whistles. Much like how, let's put it this way. Baldwin Locomotive Works was your Ford. It was one of the originals, built good products, but it generally built your kind of standard stuff. Your American Locomotive Company, which was one of the other big ones, was your General Motors. It was a conglomerate of different makers put together. This, however, was built by Lima Locomotive Works of Lima, Ohio. This was your Italian sports car of the railroad world. Anything that was new, anything that was top of the line was on this locomotive. Superheated boilers. It had boosters underneath the wheels that helped you get up to speed. This was top grade, top dollar. So I would love to tell you that we're restoring for that reason too. But no. So when the diesel locomotive was coming around, this locomotive was set to be scrapped. However, they found another use for it. In the Boston rail yards, they needed a stationary boiler to heat a couple of outbuildings and to heat the yard to keep switches from freezing during the winter. So they would take the wheels off this and simply make it into that boiler. It got saved for a little while, was set to be scrapped again. However, it got dumb luck again. In Boston, Massachusetts, there was a business building. Their heat went out, and they were looking for some way to temporarily heat their building while they were waiting for a new boiler system. So they went to the Boston Maine Railroad and said, we know that you're getting rid of some locomotives. Can we borrow one while we're waiting on a new heating system? So, yeah, we'll rent it to you. So the Boston Maine rented it to that building, and they got saved again as another stationary boiler. That building got their new boiler in, gave it back to the Boston Maine, and said, all right, go ahead and scrap it. And this was getting ready to be scrapped by the scrapper's porch when it got saved by a man by the name of F. Nelson Blount. Now, F. Nelson Blount was a lover of railroads. He loved everything having to do with trains. But he had one advantage compared to you and I, and that's that he was a billionaire. F. Nelson Blount had his hand in some of the fishing industry and fish processing and frozen fish. He also had his hand in a small restaurant called Panera, but I'm sure nobody's ever heard of that place. So he purchased railroads from all over New England and from across the United States and had his own collection in Bellows Falls, Vermont, originally in Walpole, New Hampshire. And that was called Steamtown, USA. Unfortunately, we would lose Mr. Blount in the tragic accident in the 1970s. His family did not share the same level of railroad, and they wanted his collection gone. So his friends group, they were looking for someplace new to take his collection. Scranton, Pennsylvania, a city built on railroads, built on coal mines, and having none was looking for something new to revitalize their economy. And a railroad museum seemed just a ticket, if you will. So they would bring the collection here and promptly go bankrupt. Unfortunately, moving large pieces of equipment is expensive. But a local congressman would see his collection and believe it was too good to go to waste. Joseph McDade. Joseph McDade would petition for this site to become a part of the National Park Service in 1984, and by golly, would he do it at record time. This would be designated Steamtown National Historic Site in 1986. We would spend the next 10 years cleaning up our yards, rebuilding buildings, setting up our shop, and we would open to the public in 1995. We have been working on this locomotive since the early 2000s. We looked through our whole collection that once belonged to Blount, and we decided that this locomotive was the most viable for pulling our trains on the old Delaware Lackawanna Western Main line from here up to the Delaware Water Gap. So we've been working on this since the 2000s. We have made new parts. The cab behind you is new, as well as the firebox. When we started these, there were so rusted big holes in that cab that I could stick my head through it. So we needed a new cab. We rebuilt the cab. We fixed up the drive wheels that you saw. We fixed up the other wheels. Anywhere that you see this grid pattern on the boiler, this is where we tested it. Back in the day, there would have been children working in these shops. You would have started early, right around the age of 10. You would have been in these shops taking a ball-peen hammer and hitting locomotives, listening to the metal. There's a very, 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 very thin line between a steam locomotive and a pipe bomb. So what the children would be doing is they would be tapping the metal, listening, making sure that it was sound, it was thick enough, that it would retain that steam pressure. Of course, we can't have kids in our shops today. That would be a little illegal. So
Darn.
we use technology. This is where we did ultrasound. Every place you see all these dots in this grid, we did ultrasound to make sure that metal is thick enough. This is a lot more accurate than hitting it with a hammer, of course. We did find one spot in the boiler that was a little thin. So on the other side, we cut that patch out. Now when you superheat metal, when you do welding, it makes the metal around the spot that you're cutting or repairing a little bit more brittle. So what we did when we replaced it is we took this special clay putty and we put it around the metal, so we welded it into a new piece, it wouldn't weaken the metal around it. We are approximately 75% done. We're in the process of putting things back together. Unfortunately, as I've said many times, running a railroad is expensive, time-consuming, and takes a lot of money. And a lot of people to work on it. So we are waiting to get the money to work on this. And once we do, we'll hire contractors who will come in and help us put this together. Once we get that funding, it'll be done like that. Or hopefully it'll be done pretty soon. So in the meantime, we have Constitution here as a great way to show how we work on our locomotives. So in those bigger shops, this wouldn't have been uncommon to see a locomotive torn apart like this. It's taken us over 24 years. They would do that kind of work in no time flat, maybe a month or less. So it just goes to show you how much technology has changed over time and how much we've kind of lost over time as well. But I know I'm butting up against my time for the end of our shop tour. So before we leave Constitution, does anybody have any questions about the locomotive or about restoration? Go ahead.
What did you say that he wrote to get that title?
So he wrote a short essay that the Constitution is the backbone of the United States, and just as the Constitution is the backbone of the U.S., so too are the American railroads the backbone of American industry. That's all he wrote.
That's simple to get a title like that.
Yeah, so next time your teachers tell you to have a 5-page essay, just point to James Truman Moore and say, look, he got a train named for only about 2 sentences. Anybody else? Yes.
So that just is going to mesh with that?
Yes. So the firebox is with the cap here. It's going to fit into this portion here. We're going to take the metal off there, seat it down in. And that way you have also water that will be around that firebox and then the boiler. And then the cab will attach onto the back part of the locomotive here for the engineer and the firemen to have a dry place while they drive. All right. If there aren't any more questions,